The risk is now that we are creating another lost generation. Yeah, but it is avoidable. Okay, so let's start with the macro stuff. It's depressing. I'm not going to focus on it too much. Okay, there are several sensible things that government should be trying to do when facing the kind of economic collapse that Ireland is doing. The first is devalue your currency. Oh, that's a shame. Can't do that one. Kind of reliant on Germany devaluing, and they're not in such a hurry. Okay, you want to maintain fiscal stimulus, you want to maintain the fiscal position in order to prevent the economic downturn spreading wider, at least until which the recovery is fixed enough, firm enough that you can, in a sense, reduce government deficits without exacerbating the nature of the slowdown and unemployment. Again, the severity of the collapse of the government's finances means that just hasn't been maintained within Ireland. So number 2 is ruled out. Number 3 is sort of similar, which is that what a lot of other countries have done to try and avoid the problems which Ireland are facing is to use targeted reductions in employer social insurance contributions. In Germany, they're using it to create short-term working rather than open unemployment, with the loss of earnings supported, loss of hours being supported by reduced employers' national insurance contributions, social insurance contributions. Okay, lots of other countries, Sweden, are cutting their social insurance contributions on high-risk groups, such as youth unemployment. So the employer's social insurance in Sweden has been cut in half for young people. Okay, this is a sensible way, particularly in a small open economy like Ireland, to reduce the costs of labour, to reduce, if you like, the costs of production in Ireland, to try and make it more viable to export and so on. Okay, again, the finance position means that this looks like it's ruled out for far as Ireland is concerned, which means that the macroeconomic situation is limited to the slow process of trying to regain competitiveness through wage pressure being downwards, falling real wages. Yeah, it's slow, it will work. You will generate jobs eventually with people's living standards are falling if you're in a small export-orientated economy such as Ireland, but it's not pretty. Okay, but as I also intimated, it's unlikely to be shared evenly. That the concentration of where unemployment is means that the downward pressure on wages are going to be in certain sections of society, likely to be generating increased inequality. So unless there's a coordinated attempt to try and reduce wages across the distribution, you're likely to see the pain of real wage reduction focused on parts of society in an unfair way. Okay, given that most of that action's ruled out, what can we do? And in particular, what can we do to try and prevent that build-up of long-term unemployment on individuals, which is so damaging to them and to society down the line? Okay, right. If we're talking about young people, the first and obvious thing, and let's understand that this is happening in Ireland reasonably extensively, is if you're talking about young people, rather than unemployment, for Christ's sake, let's keep people in jobs, in education. Yeah? Let's raise educational participation at FE and HE kind of levels, keep people in school for longer, delaying that entry into the labour market, in a sense just simply reducing labour supply, but in the times doing so in a way that's productive because it's raising skills, raising potential down the line for those individuals. It's hard to convince kids to stay on in school when they can't see jobs available in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, but it is necessary. It's a useful part of the response. Yeah? And it has been marked in most European countries of increased participation. It's a sensible, coherent response, but it clearly cannot do the whole story. The second kind of key lesson we learned from the last 2 recessions is you've got to stop people drifting into economic inactivity. Just drifting out of the labour market entirely, losing connection with work experience, the contact systems about gaining work, and just drifting out of the system all entirely. So we've got to keep people economically active. Okay, so part of that is we need a welfare system which is keeping people supported and active in job search and trying to connect people with the jobs that become available. There are always some. Okay, there are always jobs being created. We've got to try and help people get them and prevent the kind of concentration on individuals that leads to those long-term scarring effects. Okay, so this is what we've learned over the last 30 years kind of works in this area. This is broadly sort of OECD consensus, which means that it's fairly contentious. Right, the first is you should be bringing together your benefits services and your employment, welfare to work training services into a single agency to get the whole organisation focused on helping individuals back to work, rather than having competing objectives within the organisations. Okay? That the employment services should be monitoring and supporting active job search. It is very easy, I've done it myself, to give up. Yeah? When you're facing continual rejection, the umpteenth letter, which we used to plaster our walls when I was a punk, it's easy just to give up, to face that continuous rejection, right? And people need support to maintain the effort of looking for work, of trying to present themselves well in terms of the CVs and not looking like a scary punk when you're applying for job interviews. Okay, you need the process of trying to help people maintain their job search effort. And it's, it is sensible and coherent to make benefits linked to that continuous job search effort in order to try and maintain people's motivations and support to continue. It's, again, often contested in a time of high unemployment. Why are you trying to force people to look for work continuously when there are no bloody jobs? Well, first, there are some. There are always some. But essentially is that if you aren't maintaining your job search effort, you will never get back to work, and these long-term concentrations set in. Okay, so it's first condition. There's a lot of debate about whether you should use private contractors or charitable sector organisations to take over the employment service functions from the government. My reading of this literature is that it's pretty second order. There's not a big story there. This isn't going to change your world in terms of success. Okay. And finally, in terms of that economic activity, you try and stop the drift into full-time early retirement, inactive sickness benefits, etc. That labour market withdrawal is very hard to reverse. It leads to a long-term sort of disconnection from the labour market, which is really hard to undo later. It's a big mistake which we made in the last couple of times, right? So finally, okay, within that construct, what kind of programs do we know help people gain work? Right? How can we avoid that build-up of long-term unemployment? And this is broadly what I consider to be the best practice model from the evidence base that we have. Okay? So those people who are experiencing extended periods of worklessness, those people who are experiencing repeated spells of worklessness, some other vulnerable groups who are at risk of long-term exposure to unemployment, we should be having a system which looks with some of these kind of basic properties. First, that intensive job search. You need the kind of intensive help and support for individuals to boost, maintain, and increase the effectiveness of their job search. It works. It obviously needs jobs to be around. It is dependent on economic recovery for its full effectiveness, but it does help individuals avoid long-term unemployment. Okay. However, not everybody is going to be successful in that kind of route, so you need a second stage strategy. And the second stage strategy, which is found to be effective, is either or possibly both, work experience, inside as close as possible, something which looks like regular jobs, i.e. preferably private sector, or something very similar run by the charitable sector, sometimes called transitional jobs, paid, i.e. at a minimum wage, yeah, which people can be sacked from if they piss about. So it has the basic properties of work, which employers recognise when they're when they're looking at these people as potential candidates for jobs, that they were in something which looked like work, got the references, got the experience of looking for experience of regular jobs. Training for the unemployed has often been low cost, short term, and bloody useless. Yeah. What we know works is that it has to be sustained, high-value training with, wherever possible, a guaranteed employment position or at least a guaranteed interview at the end. And some countries have been developing this, where groups of organisations, groups of companies are prepared to say that if you go down this route, we will guarantee a job offer at the end of it. Yeah? And that is when training works, rather than the short-term, disembodied, low-cost, low-intervention kind of strategies. I will just say, though, and I want to emphasise this, and it's sort of the final point, is that in the past, those kinds of schemes have failed when they have got in the way of people looking for the next job. Yeah? So what we have found is what's called the lock-in effect, which is where you take people onto a work experience program and you don't support that position of looking for the next job, that you actually delay job entry rather than enhancing it. So you have to marry this kind of work experience, working with the skills, with where the next job is. That's why the training needs to be linked to where the employer is offering the next job. It's why the work experience needs to be promulgated on the basis that the organisations running it are working to get the next job. It's not just parking somebody for 6 weeks or 6 months. It is providing and supporting the job search and contacts which enables people to move into proper work at the end of it. That is the key lesson. These programs work when they are working to move the person into work at the end of it. They don't work where they are parking somebody for 6 months and then restarting up when that process has ended. Okay. Now, I'm going to stop there because I think I've gone on enough, but the last few slides and stuff are laying out the evidence base of what's worked over the last sort of 30 years and what's failed to support that kind of position which I was highlighting there. Intensive job search, work experience and training, geared towards where the next job, connecting with employers, connecting with training which leads to direct employment contracts. If it's person doesn't get work immediately, you follow up with intensive job search, and then you do it again. I'll just say one more thing before I finish, which is that this kind of system, or its approximation, needs to be automatic. All too often, unemployment hits, we get a recession, then we start trying to solve the problem. Yeah? This kind of system needs to be in place day one. Just as like you sign on for your benefits, you need to be entering a system which is automatically operating without waiting for governments to design it, build the support networks, to build the employer engagement. Okay? It's got to be there from day one, and too often we are chasing our tails 2 or 3 years down the line to try and invent these kind of systems rather than having them automatically in place. Okay.